That record.
Great. Great. Thank you. And welcome again, everyone from far and near. We have a jam-packed agenda today and to get into this hour, so let me get going. My name is Lisa Reed. I'm the Learning Officer for the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits. We also have Rebecca with us and Leslie, center staff that are assisting to keep track of our chat and tech. So we're so delighted to have you with us again. Today we're presenting a webinar on building a resilient revenue model for sustainable growth. This will be presented by Stephanie Skrzyzowski, founder and CEO of 100 Degrees Consulting. And before Stephanie gets started, just a little brief info about the center for those of you who are not familiar. Our mission is to educate, connect, and advocate for North Carolina's nonprofits. It is important to the center to assist nonprofits to build organizational practices that address the nonprofit leadership gap by uplifting equity, diversity, and inclusion. Just so you all know, a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar will be recorded. A wraparound email will be sent after this webinar series. It's webinar today, not series. You can use the chat box for questions when prompted to reply, and we'll do our best to do so. And then at the end, we will also send out a post-session survey. So thank you. I appreciate you joining us. And with that, I'll turn it over to Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you
Mhm.
to everybody for being here today. I'm really excited to talk to you all about revenue strategy, revenue modeling. So a little intro about myself. Like Lisa said, my name is Stephanie Skrzyzowski, and I'm a nonprofit CFO. I started my company, 100 Degrees Consulting, about 10 years ago, and we provide CFO and bookkeeping services to nonprofits. And for about the 10 years before that, I was working inside nonprofit organizations in a variety of finance roles. And so nonprofit financial management is what I've literally been living and breathing for the last almost 20 years. So this is what I absolutely love, and I'm thrilled to talk to you about today. And just for a quick visual description of me today, I'm a white woman in her early 40s with long blondish brownish hair that is pulled back today. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm wearing a pink short sleeve shirt today that actually matches my nail polish like pretty exactly. So I'm excited to talk to you all about revenue modeling. So, why is it time right now to start thinking or maybe rethinking about your revenue model? Well, there's a lot going on in our sector right now, as we all know. And this quote says most nonprofits are positioned to survive a short recession, but a longer one could be devastating. And, I think the economic uncertainty is only one of many factors as to what is going on in our sector right now. Some of the challenges that you may be experiencing yourself are, we're seeing that the median US nonprofit has 2 months of operating cash on hand. That means if not another dollar came in the door, we could run our organization, pay our bills, pay our staff, run our programs for just 2 months. Also, expenses are increasing, right? We've been talking about inflation for what feels like a couple years now. Plus, the increased need for our services from our communities, from where we're working, are driving up our expenses. And then, of course, the revenue conversation that we're going to have today. Funding streams are drying up completely, drying up overnight, which we've seen, or just shifting, right? Foundations, funders that had previously funded at certain levels are just changing priorities and things look different now. It's really important to think about growing and scaling sustainably and building a sustainable revenue model because we're seeing that 40% of nonprofit leaders cite financial sustainability as their top challenge. And if this survey was done in the last 6 months or so, that number I would guess would probably be higher, right? And so the CFO's role, I don't know if anybody on this call today is the CFO or if you're sitting in other roles, but we are no longer just a number cruncher. We are really, your finance team is really a strategic partner in driving growth and driving sustainability. So if you are a CFO, you are absolutely in the right place. And then there's a changing landscape in our sector as well. We've started to be more expected to adopt for-profit strategies around performance measurement and financial ROI and diversified income streams to stay competitive with these funders. So like there's so much going on right now that it's really important to have a strategy around the money that is coming into your organization. So that's what we are talking about today, building a resilient revenue model for sustainable growth. And a revenue strategy is better than hopes and prayers, right? We need a plan because when we have a revenue strategy, that gives us some semblance of predictability and stability. Yes, there are factors that are operating outside of our control, and there's not much we can do about those. But with what is in our control, we've got a bit more stability when we're really being strategic about our revenue. When we diversify our revenue, it reduces risk, right? Those organizations that were relying on, maybe one federal grant or a couple state grants whose funding got cut overnight, they're, at a very high risk situation versus an organization that has a lot of diversity of revenue. We could be more proactive about our growth when we have a revenue strategy instead of being so reactive. We can, take very clear steps towards the future proactively towards where we want to be and that greater impact that we want to have. We can invest more in capacity building and long-term investments into our organization. Frankly, our funders expect that we have a strategy around our revenue growth. And, again, to go with the predictability and stability, it reduces staff burnout, right? When we have a plan that we are all actively working towards, we're not burning our team out who's, basically throwing spaghetti at the funding wall, just trying desperately to bring any money into the organization. So, a haphazard or a non existent revenue strategy just isn't sustainable. Every single organization, no matter what you do, no matter your past funding streams, you need a solid strategic pipeline of revenue. So, I want to ask the question, and I want you to drop this into the chat. Does your organization today have a clear revenue strategy? Give me a yes, give me a no. Where are we today? I want to get an idea of where we are. So I'm going to pop open the chat. No, no, just starting out, working on it, sort of. No, 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 no. Well, this is why we're here. Yes, but we need more. Fantastic. Yes. Awesome. Well, ish. Crystal, I like that ish. Um, so that's why we're here today. So everyone, I hope, is going to take something away from today, whether you have a revenue strategy, what you've lost a couple grants, you have a development plan, but maybe there's more that you can do. Everyone's going to take something away from our session today. And before we dive into the heart of the content, I'm going to ask a few questions throughout, similar to this one. And so get ready to type into the chat. Also, as we go, feel free to, when a question pops into your head, put it into the chat and I will get to it when there's a good pause in the content so we can make sure that we keep rolling and we'll stop at some designated times. But if you have a question in your head, drop it into the chat and we'll get to it. And then the last thing I want to say is that every time I do a webinar or any kind of training, I want everyone to walk away with at least one, maybe two, maybe three action items, things you're actually going to go do after our time together. Because we have 90 minutes together, about 80 minutes left at this point, and I don't want this time to be wasted. You're all very busy, and I want you to actually take action on something. So I'm going to ask you at the end, what are you going to take action on? So as we're going through, think about, okay, how can I apply this to my organization? And what am I actually going to do? Because I'm going to ask you to share at the end what you are going to do. Okay. So let us keep rolling. So today we are going to talk about what is a revenue strategy. We're going to talk about how to assess your current revenue model, right? Because we can't go to our destination if we don't know where we are right now, right? We're going to talk about crafting your revenue strategy, and I'm going to give you maybe some new ideas, or maybe some ideas that'll get the wheels turning on a new revenue stream to try for your organization. And then we're going to talk about how to forecast and model different scenarios, right? Because as we're building a strategy, we want to be able to see, well, how will this impact our bottom line? And so we're going to be talking about forecasting and modeling different scenarios. And one thing about the way that I teach is that I know that not all of you on this session today are numbers people. You're not all finance people, and so I really try to teach as if we're all not numbers people. So hopefully, none of this language. It's not going to be lots of accounting lingo and things like that. But if you ever have any question on like, wait, what was that? Just drop the question into the chat. Okay, so what is our revenue strategy? This is your intentional selection, preservation, and expansion on funding types based on your capacity and your mission. Okay, so the key word here is intentional, right? Strategies are intentional. So, before we can think about the future of our revenue strategy, we really need to understand our current revenue model and understand what's working, maybe what's not as profitable as we might think. Because sometimes it's not about trying all the things and diluting our efforts by like trying 15 different brand new revenue streams. Sometimes it's really about understanding what works and doing more of that. So, to understand what works, we need to understand our current revenue model right now. So the first thing I want you to think about is how does your money come in, right? And you would likely be able to see this on your income statement, which is your one of your financial statements that your bookkeeper or your finance person should generate for you. And you should be able to see, usually have the revenue broken down by revenue stream. So we can see, like, do you have money from fundraising? Maybe it's by private individuals on a recurring basis or a one-off basis. Maybe you have some planned giving, major gifts. That would fall under the fundraising category. Maybe you have grants, right? And these can be from foundations, from donor advised funds, from state or federal government entities. Maybe there's some corporate giving, right, by a public or private company, or maybe you have earned income, right? This is revenue generated from program or service fees. So you may have some earned income streams as well. So first is understanding, okay, what percentage of our revenue is coming from each of these sources? The second way that we sort of understand our current revenue is slicing and dicing different ways, but now we're looking at restricted versus unrestricted, right? So restricted money means that the funds can be spent in accordance with whatever restrictions the donor has placed on them. So maybe it's for a specific program, maybe it's for a specific project, or maybe it's for a specific time period, right? The funds must be used from July 2025 to June 2026. So you can't be spending that in August of 2026, right? So there's some restrictions around that money. On the flip side, there's unrestricted money as well. And this is where the funds are just available for general use for the mission of the organization. We still have to make sure that we're abiding by our policies and things like that, but we can spend it however we need to within the organization. So really knowing what your split is between restricted and unrestricted is important, because that'll kind of guide your strategy, right? If all of your funds, or a vast majority, 85% of your money is restricted right now, when you're thinking about your revenue strategy, you might need to think about, okay, well, how can we increase our unrestricted percentage, right? What's a good percentage of restricted versus unrestricted? I get the question all the time. It really depends. I have some organizations, some clients who've sort of looked at the history of their organization and have set goals for themselves, like, okay, we want no more than 60% of our funding to be restricted, with the other 40% unrestricted, right? So it depends on your organization, but knowing this number is important. So we really want to be intentional with our funding mix so that our efforts to raise more money, to bring in more revenue, are maximized, right? We want to be intentional and not just take every dollar that comes in the door. We want to be strategic about what we're doing here. This will also help figure out if we have the right people on our team to bring in that money. It will also help us align our expenses properly, right? So all of the pieces of our financials are really connected. That's why we want to make sure we're doing this with some intentionality and not just like, well, this is the way we've always done it. We've always just raised money from individuals. And so that's what we're going to do going forward. So one way to more deeply understand your current revenue model, right, your current funding mix is by looking at your financial statements. So these are reports, your income statement and your balance sheet that you can get from, again, from your bookkeeper. These are very standard basic reports that come out of QuickBooks Online or whatever your accounting system is that, by the way, you should be looking at these on a monthly basis, not just for this purpose, but monthly basis. Um, so we want to measure revenue diversity, right? So this is looking at what percentage of revenue is coming from each source, right? So we can kind of see where, see the lay of the land, see where things are right now. So in this case, if we wanted to see, okay, foundations and grants are 1.1 million of total income of 2.1 million, that's about 54%. Individuals, 160,000 divided by 2.1 million, that's 8%. And then government, it looks like 725K divided by 2.1 million is about 34%. So over half of this organization's revenue is coming from foundations and grants. What I might do to analyze this a little bit further is to actually drill down into this 1.1 million in foundations and grants to see, okay, well, how many grants make up that 1.1 million, right? If it's like one or two, that might raise a little bit of a red flag to me, like, oh, that's only a couple sources of revenue. We might really need to think about diversifying. If it's, if there's 20 grants in here, that's probably a little bit less risky. So if this is your action item, I want you to write down, look at my income statement to calculate revenue diversity, okay? Because this is really important to know kind of where you are right now. So I would recommend looking at least at the past 12 months. You could even look at, the past several years side by side and sort of do the calculations to see the trend over time. That's something I love to do, especially when I start working with a new client. That's something I could very easily geek out on, is build a big spreadsheet and kind of look at the trends over time. But you can look at the past couple of years. Okay. So the other thing that we want to look at when we're sort of evaluating our current model, our current revenue model, is look at the financial ROI of our funding and our programs, because this is going to help us understand, well, what is working in our organization when it comes to revenue, when it comes to funding, and what's not working. Right. So we just looked at, okay, what is the, what's the makeup of our revenue right now? But now let's look at, okay, but what of that revenue is actually working? Because sometimes we continue doing the same thing over and over again when it's actually, really challenging for our team, or it's really resource heavy. It's a big drag on the organization, but that's how we've always done it. So we keep doing it. That's where looking at the ROI really comes into play. And all of this, again, is the foundation before we can start moving forward and thinking ahead. So what is ROI in our organizations? And it's really the value generated by a program relative to its cost. And unlike for-profits, where we're just looking at the numbers, right? We are looking at pure margins and percentages and numbers. Nonprofit ROI, of course, considers both financial and mission-driven impact, right? So we're looking at the numbers, but we're also looking at things like lives changed, increased community engagement, resources saved. We're looking at more than just numbers. And ROI is really important because we can, justify getting funding from donors, from stakeholders. It also helps us prioritize programs that have a really high impact. It can also help us, like we're talking about now, maybe identify opportunities for improvement or for scaling successful programs, projects, revenue streams, ones that are doing really well, right? So it's really important to look at these numbers. So when we're looking at ROI, we want to look at financial sustainability. And so this is especially relevant if you have money coming in for specific programs. So we're looking at the programs now. Does this program cover its own costs, right? Does the revenue either equal or exceed what it costs to run this program? Or on the flip side, does it, contribute to overhead or drain resources? How consistent is the revenue for this particular program? What is the cost per outcome? And I will say you will get these slides, so don't feel like you have to take notes on every single slide. You will get these slides in the email following the session. So we've looked at the financial sustainability. Then we want to look at mission alignment, right? And we're looking at programs right now. So does the program clearly advance our mission? Is this part of our current strategic plan? Does it serve our primary beneficiaries? Is this something that we're really proud of, right? Oftentimes, I've seen this so many times that, we maybe we get a grant for a program that's sort of tangential to what we normally do, and hey, money is money, so we take it. And then we've been doing this program for years and it's not super aligned with, the core, the heart of our mission. And it's a drain on resources and it's taking up unrestricted dollars, but we keep doing it because that's how we've always done it. That's what we're looking at right now, right? So when we're looking at these things, there's just a very simple matrix that we can use here, looking at mission alignment, high mission alignment, low mission alignment, and then financial sustainability, high and low. So if something is super aligned and it's super financially sustainable, that's our sweet spot, right? We're going to hold on to that and we're going to scale that. So that might be one area where we want to drive more revenue to that because we know that it's working. On the flip side, going down here, if we have low mission alignment, maybe it's one of those tangential programs, and low financial sustainability, maybe it's something we need to shift, transition, sunset, phasing out. And I've seen organizations do this before. So we need to make some strategic decisions, right? If we're seeing that there's pieces of our organization that are just not financially sustainable. So doing this analysis can help us figure out, can we maybe optimize costs or maybe improve the impact of programs that are lower performing? Or can we reallocate resources to what's working well, right? And double down on those. And maybe there's like a couple small experiments we can try to make some shifts within the organization. But this is really how we are going to move forward in times like these that just feel so uncertain, is we have to think outside of the box that we have been operating in for maybe a really long time, and do this analysis and start to get creative with how we're bringing money into the organization. So when we look at this, when we've kind of plotted out our programs and our activities on this matrix, the results are going to tell us what's delivering the most impact for the resources invested, and where can we find some efficiencies without sacrificing outcomes, and what programs or activities might need more investment, more restructuring, or a phase out. So here's an example. A youth development nonprofit that I worked with had 6 after-school programs, and 2 of the 6 were consistently under enrolled, but they'd been offered forever, right? We'd been doing these forever, and they were cherished by people that had worked there for a really long time and really loved these programs and loved the kids that they were working with. So there was definitely a lot of heart involved here. But we looked at a lot of numbers. We looked at the cost per student. We looked at the amount of staff time that was spent there, and we looked at, is this really aligned with our mission? And so we found that these underperforming programs cost 3 times more per student than the others. And so what we did is we had to sunset one of the low ROI programs. Instead of, continuing to funnel resources there when the revenue was just not coming in, we reallocated those resources to expand a different initiative, right? So the organization communicated to donors and funders about the decision, about the rationale. They were able to find about $60,000 in savings, which they were able to reallocate to salaries and to bring somebody else onto the team. So This is important because it was a bold and kind of scary decision, but they were able to free up resources for the growth of the organization. And so, as you're starting to think about, okay, where is revenue coming in? Where is it going? Really understanding the ROI on this, there may need to be some tough decisions, but that's part of the strategy. So the key takeaway here is that, when we're making these informed decisions, because we've actually looked at the numbers, we've looked at our financial statements, we've looked at some programmatic KPIs, we can make some decisions to allocate resources more strategically, to scale what's working, and to maybe adjust what is not working so well. So I want you to please reflect and think about a couple of your programs or funding sources. And you certainly don't have to calculate any ROI while we're on this call right now, but I want you to make a note of the ones that you are going to look at after our call today. Okay. I want you to think about, all right, yeah, this one, this particular revenue stream or this particular program is just like not seeming to work. So think about that and write down one or two areas that you're going to dig a little bit deeper into the ROI. So if you're like, well, how do I find this information? The other thing I want to share is that you can ask your bookkeeper for an income statement by program. Okay. In QuickBooks, they might be using it's called class as a program. So you can say an income statement by class. And what that will show you is you'll see revenue and expenses for each program. So, like each program or project area or grant, however you have your accounting system structured, will be a separate column. So, if your bookkeeper is coding everything by program, you'll be able to see revenue and expenses by program. And so that will really be able to show you, okay, maybe this program costs $100,000, but we're only bringing in $10,000 a year for it. Well, okay, maybe that's part of our strategy then is we need to attract more dollars to fund this specific program, right? There's a lot of information in this report, income statement by class or an income statement by program that you can ask your bookkeeper for. Okay, I'm going to pause for a sec and see, let's see. Look for questions. Okay, it looks like one question. When evaluating ROI, Sharon asks, is it ever appropriate to assign a value to non-financial impact? For example, similar organizations might have similar financial ROIs and number of clients served, but one may provide more value to the clients. How does that get captured? That's a fantastic question. And I think that is like one of the beautiful things about nonprofits is that we do have ROIs that are not necessarily attached only to financials. And so I think that's really sort of up to you to figure out how you're going to sort of define and articulate that value. But 100%, yes, you can definitely use value as part of your evaluation for sure. And Nancy, you're just building your programs. Well, you're at the perfect stage then to be able to really start thinking about this as you're building your revenue strategy along with building your programs. Fantastic.
You have one other one before that one, Stephanie. Want me to read it to you?
Did I miss your answer to this? Oh, do you
Yeah.
categorize donor advised fund gifts as
Yeah.
grants rather than individual donations? It depends. It depends. There's always some nuance to this, but yeah, usually individual donations if it's from an individual. I think somebody answered that one. Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. Now that we understand our current revenue model and our ROI, which I know you all are going to go and do this after our session today, how are we going to use this information to build our revenue strategy? Okay. So, laying the foundation of our revenue strategy. The first thing that we want to do is make sure that all of the right people are in the room. So we need to make sure that our executive director, leadership, that they are part of this conversation because they really have the full picture of what mission success looks like, right? We want to make sure, and as a CFO, this is near and dear to my heart, we want to make sure your finance person is involved, right? Because your finance person, all of these calculations and this analysis that we just talked about, they can be just invaluable in that process, right? They can give you the metrics on the current model, what's working, what's not working. And then, of course, your director of development, your fundraising person or people, they understand not only the current mix of revenue, but also what level of effort does it take to bring this money in the door, right? Sometimes a lot, and it's not always clear to the executive director, to the CFO, what level of effort is required. So this is like a team effort here: leadership, finance, fundraising. Okay, so we're all working together. The next part of this sort of foundation of our revenue strategy is I want you to shift your mindset and remember that not all money is good. And I don't mean taking money from unethical sources. That's obviously bad. I just mean that certain funds are not perfectly aligned with our mission. Certain money, they are expensive to manage or to carry out. If we think about staff time required to submit this, 50-page grant report for a $5,000 grant, right? So in that case, it wouldn't be good for us to take that. The second thing is we need to think like a business. And like we just talked about, focusing our efforts on high ROI activities, because at the end of the day, our staff time is limited. Your time is a finite resource, right? And for a lot of us, our budgets are limited as well. And so we can't be like willy nilly doing all the things, applying to all the grants. We need to be focusing on high ROI activities. And then the last piece is really understanding your numbers, your own numbers. I obviously am a finance person, and so numbers are my thing. Even if numbers are not your thing, I want you to stop telling yourself that, and I want you to tell yourself, I can learn to understand and use the numbers, and that's exactly what we're doing here today. So the next piece of our foundation is getting on the same page with all the stakeholders that we talked about: leadership, finance, fundraising, and figuring out what revenue is an easy yes for us, right? What is like, yes, 100%, we're going for that type of money. And then what is a no? When do we say no? How do we say no? What is like, that's not for us, right? But and then where's that gray area? What if something is a maybe? And this is a conversation that you need to have with your leadership team, right? With who is in charge of fundraising and finance and the entire organization. We need to all be on the same page, that we're kind of working in the same direction. So when we think about what is an easy yes, what kind of money, what revenue is an easy yes, we're definitely going to go after that. That is a priority for this organization. Well, a lot of times, of course, it's in alignment with our strategy, with our strategic plan, but also many times it mirrors what is already working well, right? What kind of grants do you already go after that you nail it every single time? What events do you run that are like a huge success and super profitable, right? Do what's already working. Um, what's an easy yes? Something that you have the staff to support, right? Maybe let's not do a 500-person gala if you're a team of two and have never done a gala before, right? You need to have the staff to support this. An easy yes is something with none or few but manageable strings attached, right? Like not that grant for $5,000 that has a 50-page report due every 3 months, right? That's too many strings. It's not worth the time. Something that's profitable, something that is reliable, right? If especially something is an easy yes, if it's recurring revenue perhaps, and if it positively impacts our cash flow. And maybe you have others, right? This is not exhaustive. You may have other things that you're like, yes, we're definitely doing that. But what's important is that you come up with this list together so we're all on the same page. When should we say no? Well, it's basically the opposite of everything we just talked about. When money has too many strings attached, right? We want to empower the entire organization to say no when we're in alignment on this. If there's too many strings attached, if there are program requirements outside of our core mission, right? We have all heard the term before, mission creep. And I find that mission creep happens mostly when there's money involved, right? Some funder offers you $50,000 to do this particular thing that they're really interested in, but it's only like sort of related to your mission, but you do it anyway because there's money and there's, it's got like 15% overhead. So you're like, yes, let's do it. Maybe that's a no for your organization, right? Because it's taking you away from your core mission activities. Maybe there's extremely taxing reporting requirements. I have seen some things, my friends. I have seen a lot of very taxing reporting requirements. Maybe they don't fund any administrative costs. Maybe there's some terms and conditions around it that require a significant upfront investment in cash. Like I know an organization that for many years had received the majority of their funding from a number of state grants, but the state required that they front all of the cash for all of these activities up front. And then they were basically on like a 60-day like payment terms. So they had to front like hundreds of thousands of dollars for 60 days before the state would reimburse them. Like you might just literally not be able to do that. So figure out what your no's are. This also helps you sort of keep each other in check. When one person is like, oh gosh, we have this opportunity. We can go through our list of no's and somebody else can say like, no, it's, the reporting requirements are too much. We don't have the capacity to do this. We're going to have to pass. So you can check each other. Okay, when is it a maybe? Maybe there are some activities that you think would be profitable, but you need some time, you need some resources, you need some data to prove it out, right? We can't grow or do anything new if we don't allow ourselves the space to experiment. And that's what we're talking about today. I'm hoping that you're going to walk away today with maybe some fresh ideas on things to try, right? We're not going to try everything all at once. But there are sometimes you want to try something new, right? Because you don't know what that might lead to. What I will say is that we need to know when we're going to stop, when we're like, okay, we're done. It's not working or it's working. Let's scale it. So assign a budget, assign a time frame, and stick to it. Okay. So once your leadership team and the key players, right, your finance person, your development person, once we all understand our yes, our no, our maybe, we can more strategically focus our efforts on the funds, on the partnerships, on the relationships that are a yes, rather than wasting time on things that are not a good fit, right? If you have determined that, you know what, grants are not our thing. We don't have a grant writer. We don't have the capacity for the reporting requirements. You've determined that like this doesn't really meet your criteria of what is an easy yes. Well, let's stop applying for grants then. Let's do more of what is actually working, right? So my question for you all is, do you know your easy yes, your hard no, and your maybe for revenue strategy at your organization? Have you talked about it before? Do you know with confidence, like what is an easy yes? What are we definitely going for? So drop that into the chat. I would love to know. Do you know? Just give me a yes or no. Yes, we know. No, we don't know. Some yeses, some nos. Yeah, okay. All right, good. I'm seeing a lot of yeses. That's fantastic. So we kind of have an idea of yeah, we kind of have an idea of like what is a yes for us, what is a no for us. That's fantastic. All right. Okay. So let's keep rolling. Okay, so crafting our revenue strategy. So everything we've talked about up until now is sort of assessing where we are right now and then kind of building a foundation of, all right, what are the things that we need to have in place before we start thinking about where we're going with revenue, right? So when we're thinking about crafting our revenue strategy, we obviously want some diversity in our funding sources. So we're going to talk about each one of these a little bit more and go into a little bit more detail. But some ideas are grants, right? Lots of different sources for grants. Individuals, again, lots of different ways to tackle individual contributions. There's corporate partnerships, there's events, there's government contracts, there's earned income ventures. Lots of choices here. So, grants. I'm going to kind of go through each one because, again, if your organization has been really focused on one area historically, you may be like, oh, I hadn't even thought about that as an option for us. So, as I'm talking, I want you to frame this in the light of your own organization. Okay. So, grant funding, there's grants from government agencies, from private foundations, from corporations, and there's other grant making entities that really align with your mission and your programs. And you can apply for grants for specific projects or programs or general operations. So, there is unrestricted money available from grants as well. Individual donations, right? This is all about cultivating relationships. It's about developing fundraising campaigns and events and donor stewardship strategies. And there are people that are like amazing experts in individual giving. You can use online platforms, crowdfunding, direct mail. There's lots of ways to engage individual donors who are passionate about your cause. Anything from recurring, like a recurring giving program where people are, automatically giving $50 every month to your organization, up to, major gifts where you're soliciting 5, 6, and 7-figure gifts. So this is a pretty big category here. And I've seen some organizations rely almost entirely on individual donations. And then other organizations I know get maybe like less than 5% of their funding from individual donations. So there's no right or wrong way to raise money. It depends on what works for your org. Corporate partnerships. So you can find partnerships with businesses and corporations that share your values and your goals. There are sponsorship opportunities, but they can also just donate to the organization. I worked with an amazing organization whose mission was centered around travel. And so over time, they built relationships with the big name travel brands. So a luggage company, major airlines, and the airlines donated miles so that they could use them towards their mission for their programs. They also donated money. The luggage company donated suitcases and money. And so there's really amazing, very aligned partnerships that you can form. So think about like what corporations have a similar value as us, because there's a lot of opportunity here. Special events, I feel like, yeah, there's a lot to be said about events. But maybe there are events that are really a great fit for your organization, and maybe there's something again that's super aligned that would really make sense. I will say that post-COVID, most organizations that I work with have completely nixed their events because they just weren't profitable. It was one of those things that like, well, this is how we've always done it. We've always had a gala, so let's keep having a gala. But when we looked at the numbers and, we spent $100,000 or, raised $100,000 and spent, 50 grand to host the event, plus all of the time and energy that went into it, it's like, is there an easier way that we could raise $50,000? The answer is almost always yes. That being said, special events, I'm not knocking them, but really think about the profitability of those if this is a main component of your revenue model right now. Government contracts, local, state, federal agencies. Yeah, not sure what opportunities are here right now, and it seems like it's ever changing. But this has been a big source of funding for many nonprofits for a very long time. Earned income. So we're going to go into this one a little bit more because this is one area that I'm seeing a lot of organizations start to pursue, because this is basically generating unrestricted revenue. So earned income is revenue through the sale of goods or services that are related to your mission. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail in the subsequent slides. So we're going to dig deeper into earned income right now. And this is where I'm seeing organizations like look at what assets they already have as an organization and start to explore how they could charge money for those, how they can bring in some revenue for things that they already have. Um, so again, I want you to think about this in the context of your organization. So fee-based services, right? Maybe there is some expertise around your mission area that you could offer consulting services or training workshops or educational programs, something like that. Like, do you have content or services that you already offer that you could charge for? Product sales, right? Merchandise. I work with one organization that sells scarves and other like material based crafts that are made in a different country. So there's of course merchandise, but also educational materials, right? Workbooks for your curriculum, maybe, or books or digital products. Rental income, do you have a space where that you could rent out for events or even meeting rooms, conference rooms that go unused most of the time? Office space, you could sublet, a little room in your office to somebody else that needs some office space or another organization. Do you have, valuable equipment that you could rent out or technology, right? Again, thinking about what do you already have that you could think about generating some income with. Membership programs, right? Charity Water has several memberships that offer different benefits to members and they serve the organization. So you can do tiered membership levels with varying perks and priority registration for events or access to, member only content or resources or recognition or building a community, right? There's lots of opportunities for a membership. Licensing and royalties. And so basically licensing your content, your intellectual property, your curriculum to other organizations who might need that. I know one organization that was sort of like a community health center, and they'd come up with a really solid model for how they ran their organization. And so they sort of packaged up this model and were able to license it to other organizations looking essentially to replicate that model in their geographic areas. So think about that intellectual property that your organization might already have that could potentially be licensed as an earned income stream. And that's social enterprise ventures, right? That's, a venture that generates revenue while advancing your mission. So, a business that, maybe employs disadvantaged populations or produces environmentally sustainable products or addresses social needs in some sort of innovative way, right? So, a business model that really balances financial sustainability with social impact. And I just use this example of this bakery that provides baked goods while providing employment and job training opportunities for people facing barriers to employment. Okay, so one example I have to share is this environmental nonprofit organization. And they found that, as many of us are experiencing, that their grant income was declining and their fundraising event revenue was completely unpredictable. One year they'd have a banner year, and the next year it would be essentially a flop. And so they relied very heavily, probably way too heavily, on a handful of major donors. And so executive director and the development team created a new earned income stream. So they basically leveraged their, expertise that they already had at the organization internally to develop a seasonal certification program for eco tour guides. They had different pricing tiers for individuals, for corporate teams, and then they promoted this as a professional development experience, which was really aligned with their mission. So they were able to generate $85,000 in unrestricted revenue. They also brought new audiences to the organization, these groups of, corporate employees that may not have known about them previously, outdoor educators, and they were also able to get a new corporate sponsorship relationship. And so they were able to essentially monetize the assets, the things they already owned that were very much aligned with their mission, They piloted, they tested it, they scaled it, right? So not only did they bring in a new unrestricted revenue stream, but they opened their doors to a new set of funders. So that was sort of like an unexpected benefit, is that now they have this brand new audience of potential donors that they didn't have before. So just this is an example of creativity. They tested something and it happened to work. And so they were able to scale and grow. But creativity in revenue generation isn't just about financial sustainability, it's about unlocking new ways to expand your impact and to serve your community, right? So there's something about not doing things the way that we've always done it, right? There's something about, bringing some more creativity into our revenue model, that will make us sustainable in maybe ways that we didn't expect, right? So for the organization that I just used, that environmental nonprofit, like this increased their sustainability, not only because of the new revenue stream, but also because of the doors it unlocked to an entirely, new population of potential donors. Okay. So I want you to think about your own organization and a fresh idea or two for how to expand your current revenue portfolio. I want you to think about this. We just talked about a lot of different areas. We talked about grants and individuals, and then within individuals, like, recurring giving all the way up to major gifts and everything in between. We talked about earned income and a lot of different earned income streams. So I want you to write down a fresh idea or two for maybe testing or expanding your revenue portfolio. Okay. Think about that for a moment. Yeah, Nancy says we have the capacity for grant writing, but finding grants that fund our mission is very challenging. Yeah, so that's a great point. So maybe grants are not your thing, right? I mean, maybe there are, maybe there's just a little bit more digging, a little bit more research for finding the funders that are really aligned with your mission, or maybe not. If there's something else in your organization that is really working, maybe it's time to double down on that, right? Nancy, love that idea. New revenue, seek sponsors for our newsletters. Diane asks, what about the private foundations that come through neighborhood giving or family trusts? Would that be considered grants or donors? Many of those grants come from individual people or through friends of board members. Ugh. There's lots of nuance with this kind of thing, Diane. I would need to kind of know exactly what I'm looking at to be able to tell you exactly. So yeah, sorry. I would need to be able to see what you're talking about. It can be a little bit tricky. Leslie said, we're working on individual giving, cultivating major donors, and strategizing the annual fund. Amazing. Yeah, that's fantastic. All right, let's keep going. Okay, so I'm all about action, as you know, as I've said many times so far today. And so here's what we want to think about doing next, right? We assessed our current revenue model. We thought about the ROI of our current programs. Now we have some different ideas for revenue streams. So let's kind of bring it all together, right? So we're going to look at our current revenue model using metrics like we talked about, and then at this qualitative piece, which I haven't really talked too much about, but especially for, for my development folks or those people that are responsible for raising the money, I want you to think, what is running like a well-oiled machine? What is like, oh man, it's like money is just flowing in the door when we do XYZ, right? Think about that versus what feels really challenging or heavy, right? Because there's something to be said for that. If something is just a slog to complete this particular grant application or to run this event, is that worth the effort and energy? So I want you to think about the qualitative piece as well. Then remember, we're going to talk about making sure we're aligned, right? Getting the right people in the right decision-making seats around revenue. We talked about figuring out your yes, no, and maybe. And then what we haven't talked about yet is I want to make sure that we've also aligned our expense budget to make sure that you have resources dedicated to each revenue stream and any potential experimentation. So, for example, if you're like, okay, we want to expand our donor base. We want to go all in on individual donors, and we want to expand our donor base. And maybe you're in one geographic area, you're in the eastern part of the state, and you really want to go to the western part of the state. Well, you need some travel dollars, right? You need some money in a travel budget to be able to get to the western part of the state, to be able to build those relationships, right? You need money in the budget to be able to take someone out to coffee or to lunch to build those relationships. And so oftentimes what I see is that we have these grand plans, whatever they might be, and we have not allocated any resources to support those plans. And so we don't hit our goals, and we never make progress because we haven't allocated any resources. So I just want to make sure that we have aligned our expense budget accordingly. Think about how much money you will need to spend to bring in the revenue that you want to bring in. Okay, so we need to make sure our expense budget is aligned as well. Then we are going to forecast and model scenarios. So that's what we've not yet talked about. So we want to look at different what if scenarios in a forecast template, right? So we want to look at revenue and expenses by month. So each column is a month, both short term, so this year and probably next year. A medium term look is maybe 3 to 5 years, and longer term is 5+. You may not need a 5+ year forecast at this point. But we want to look at the numbers that go along with these different revenue strategies so we can help we'll use a forecast to basically predict what these actions might look like, what the results might be that will help us make a decision on what to go all in on, right? Okay, so what is a forecast? I want to just share the difference between a budget and a forecast because I often hear people sort of calling them the same thing and they're different. Okay, so your budget is created once a year, right? It is based on the information that you have at that snapshot in time, that day, that week, that month that you're creating the budget. Your budget is approved by your board and it's static, right? Once the board approves it, we put it into the accounting system, and that is our budget the rest of the year when we look at a budget versus actual report, right? We do a budget once. Now, your forecast, on the other hand, is a live document. It is a management tool, and we're updating it monthly. I like to update my forecast monthly, maybe quarterly, if you don't have a lot of stuff changing. So the forecast is really based on actuals, like what has already happened in, let's say, the first 6 months of this year, and updated assumptions. So, what we think today, July 16th, what we think is going to happen for the rest of the year. Now, that could be and likely is very different. What I think today is going to happen for the rest of the year than what I thought back in October when I created the budget, right? That's why the forecast is so important because so much has changed from the moment that we created the budget to today that we want to have this more real-time look at our numbers. It's very flexible, it's responsive, right? If you decide, hey, we're gonna, scrap the event that we were planning on having in November, and we're gonna, write these, 12 grant proposals instead. Great, let's update the forecast so we can see the potential impact to our bottom line on those actions, right? That's what a forecast is. So, forecasting helps us identify any potential gaps really early. So, if there's going to be any revenue shortfalls, if we're overspending or potentially underspending, we can see that before it happens. So, if we need to make a shift or a change, we can do that before running into problems. Um, Especially when we're talking about building this revenue strategy, a forecast helps with scenario planning and decision making, right? We can kind of play out different scenarios if we decided to go all in on this earned income stream. Like, what would the numbers look like if we decided to do that? Um, a forecast can help, build confidence with your board, with your funder. If you've got, a 3-year forecast, That is a vision. That is a financial vision for the future of your organization. And funders love to see that. They're very confident in that. They're like, great, you know where you're going. I want to be part of this plan, right? I want to be part of this vision. We're smarter with our hiring, with our spending, with our investment. And, as programs may shift and change based on what's going on in the world around us, we can make sure that we're updating our numbers accordingly. So, forecasting is huge. Every organization needs a forecast. If you take away one thing from today, I would love to see you create a forecast, and I will give you a template for it, so you don't have to start with a blank Excel screen. Okay, so, how to build a forecast? Like, what does this actually mean? How do we do it in reality? Okay, so we're always going to start with our budget, right? Let's use the budget as a baseline for the forecast because presumably you put a lot of thought and effort and research and calculation into the budget. And so that's as good a place as any to start. So we're going to use that as our baseline. Then we're going to pull in our actuals, our actual revenue, our actual expenses on a monthly basis. I've got a picture to show you. I'm going to pop back to this. So you can see, this template, this sort of Excel sheet started with the budget, but then as we've gone through the year, we've pulled in our actuals for January, February, and March, and then these are our projections for the rest of the year. So that's kind of what I mean when we're looking at actuals plus projections. So then every month, we're going to update the assumptions. So we'll put in our actuals and then we look at the rest of the year and we make changes, right? Maybe after today, like I said, you've decided, all right, we're not doing our gala in November anymore. Great. So we are going to go into the forecast. We are going to edit, where the revenue said that we're going to make $50,000 in November for the gala. We're going to take that out. We're going to take out the expenses for that as well. So we're going to update this every single month so that we have a really clear picture of what our year is going to look like. We want to make sure that we then, are looking far enough in the future, not too far, but we always want to make sure that we're extending our forecast at least to the fiscal year end, maybe 12-month rolling. I like to look like right now for all of my clients, they're all calendar year fiscal year. So I am looking now to December 2026. So I'm actually looking at like 18 months in the future. So this can really show you, where things are going. And also, if you're trying a new revenue stream, you can see like, all right, well, based on my thoughts about this, based on where we are right now, here's where I think we're going to be by the end of next year. So we want to make sure we've got a decent time horizon that we're looking at here. And then we want to look at our cash flow impact as well. Because just because you signed, $1 million grant doesn't mean $1 million in cash lands in your bank the same day. So we want to make sure that we're managing our cash flow as well. Like I know I keep talking about special events and I'm not trying to bash them by any means, but I do know, one organization that I have worked with, they have an annual fall gala. And as you know, if you've ever hosted or run any type of event before, you have to pay the vendors before the event, right? And so the majority of their money usually comes in Q4, but they have to spend all of this money, like hundreds of thousands of dollars before the event to pay for the event. And they don't really have a lot of money because all their money comes after the event, right? You're in this, really tricky situation. So that's why looking at cash flow is so important when you're building your revenue model and thinking about different revenue opportunities. That's why it's so important to get a really clear picture of your financial health. So I'm going to give you this template. So again, you don't have to start from scratch, but what you would do is go in here and enter your revenue line items. Like don't try and cram your financials into these line items, like just edit the lines so it looks like your income statement. It should mirror the income statement that comes from your accounting system, it should mirror it exactly, right? So if you call individual donations something different, if you have a line for major gifts, add that in, right? This should look just like your income statement. Same thing for expenses. Then we want to plug in our actuals for, if your fiscal year is the calendar year, January through June, we should have actuals at this point, plug them all in. And then July through December, start with the budget numbers, but then let's update things. If you have an idea for an earned income stream that you're like, okay, it's July 16th. Realistically, we might see our first revenue from this in September. Maybe it would ramp up a little bit October, and by December it'll be rolling. Okay, well, let's plug those numbers in so we can see the impact, right? And if there are any expenses that come along with some of this new revenue, modeling that we're talking about, we got to make sure to plug those in as well. Maybe you've done really well with grant writing with a contract grant writer, and you want to give that person more hours so they can write more grants. Great. Let's make sure we're adding that into our expenses. Okay. Okay, then our cash flow forecast in the template that I will share with you. This is actually linked to the detailed forecast. And so every time you update something over there, that cash flow is automatically updated. And so every time you change things, you can see how that impacts literally the amount of money in your bank. It looks like we have $500,000 in incoming cash in August. Well, maybe that's a grant that is only going to be $400,000 now, and it's not going to come till September. Well, you can see how that impacts your bank balance with those changes. And you may want to, if you're thinking about different options for revenue, you may want to make copies of this, right? Like duplicate the tab so you can say, okay, well, if we go with, option A, where we're going all in on grants, here's what this might look like. If we're going for option B, where we're doubling down on, cultivating individual donors, that's what this might look like, right? So really think about that and look at different scenarios. Okay. All right, so let us recap our revenue strategy. So if you've been multitasking, come back, come back, and I want you to really be thinking about what your action item is, because I'm going to ask you in just a few minutes, and you're going to type it into the chat for me. So to recap everything that we have talked about today, first we want to intentionally, right? Intentionally, not reactively, but proactively, intentionally choose funding types based on our unique capacity, based on our mission. Right? We want to do things that are aligned with us, not just because we saw another nonprofit across town having a lot of success with this. So why don't we try it? Right? It's that shiny object syndrome. I have been victim to that many, many times in my own work, and it's tempting, but let's do it. Let's make choices based on our own uniqueness. Right? We want to think like a business. Maybe calculating that ROI for different facets of our organization using an income statement by program, focusing on those high ROI activities. And I don't want you to guess. I don't want us to build a revenue strategy based on vibes. I want us to build a revenue strategy based on our numbers, right? That's why we're analyzing our current model. That's why we're forecasting future opportunities and sort of pairing that with that qualitative feedback, like I talked about. Is this, particular revenue stream really taxing for us to produce? So we want to use all of that data together to build our strategy. We want to get the right people in the room. We want to know when to say yes, when to say maybe, when to say no, and just align our expense budget and our staff to our revenue strategy as well. Again, it's a mistake that I see happen all the time, is that we have these grand plans, but we've allocated no resources to accomplishing the grand plans. So everyone feels very disappointed when the grand plans don't happen because we had no money to do them, right? So let's plan that proactively in advance. All right, so now it is time. I want everybody to please drop into the chat what is at least one thing you are going to take action on today. Drop it into the chat and I will Read them out loud. All right. Forecast, yes. Okay, love it, Jessica. Love it, Rhonda. Charlene, forecast. Cassidy, oh my gosh, evaluate our event ROI. I love this. And one thing I'll say about event ROI is that I've seen organizations have virtually like very minimally profitable events, but there was a sort of qualitative ROI that was not financial, that was really important to them, that they looked at it not just as a fundraising event, but as a community event. And so think about that as well, right? Let's definitely look at the financial ROI, but if there are other non-tangibles, think about those as well. A forecast. Joe says reflecting on the ROI of multiple programs, a forecast. Leslie, establish a finance committee. Yes, very important for good governance of a nonprofit. I love that. And Leslie, they can help you with some of this, right? Like they can help strategize and they can look at a forecast and provide feedback on a forecast that you've created. So I love that. John says update our forecast and look at ROIs. Perfect. Sharon, considering fresh ideas for revenue streams, forecast. I'm curious, does anyone want to drop into the chat any revenue stream, a fresh idea that you want to try, or yeah, something new that you might explore? Did anything come to mind as we were going through all of those? I would love to hear if you drop those into the chat. Courtney says collecting programming ROI data. That's awesome. Okay, John says corporate partnerships. Yeah, that's awesome. I think there's so much opportunity there for really aligned corporations. Oh, Trevor says corporate sponsorships. Awesome. Leslie, social enterprise. Where'd it go? Social enterprise ventures, other earned income. Joe, corporate retreats utilizing your housing and arts programming. Oh my gosh, I love that. Okay, we got lots of corporate partnerships going on, Nancy. Corporate partnerships, awesome. Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity here. Courtney is going to expand their circle of individual donors, education opportunities. Yeah, this is fantastic. Oh, I'm so excited to see this. I actually recorded a podcast episode with the executive director of the organization that I was talking about on my podcast, The Prosperous Nonprofit. Her name is Eliza Pursuit, and she talked about using LinkedIn as her method for getting these corporate partnerships. So just like combing LinkedIn, finding the right contact person at the companies that she was interested in building partnerships with that have expanded into, decade plus long, really valuable partnerships for both the nonprofit and the corporation. And it all started on LinkedIn. So it's not like she had previous connections or any insider hookups. It was all like, let me connect with these people genuinely on LinkedIn. And this led to really something incredible. So fantastic. Well, thank you all so much for sharing. I'm happy to answer. We didn't have that many questions throughout, so I'm happy to answer more questions if you have them. I do have the cash flow template for you. If you go to this QR code, you should be able to get that. And I can also, you'll get these slides again. So we'll make sure we include that as well. But if anybody has questions about anything we talked about or otherwise, I'm happy to answer. Nancy asked if anyone else uses social media for fundraising. Does anyone want to who does that want to chime in and share?
Anyone can unmute if you'd like to. If it's easier to just respond, you can go ahead and unmute, I think. If you want to weigh in on that question or another question you may have.
Any social media fundraising experts here want to help Nancy?
The silence could be indicative of folks not taking advantage of that or not going down that path or not exploring that one.
Yeah. Anybody, if anybody wants to share any, creative activities that they've already done, that could be useful for other people to hear, I would also love to hear that. Any unique revenue ideas? Feel free to unmute.
Yeah, I think folks are in deep thought also.
It must be. We're processing.
A lot of good information. Yeah.
Okay,
Someone
Leslie
put
said
something.
we recently had a very engaging video go viral on Instagram. It was shared by, is it SZA? I think
Mm-hmm.
I had to ask somebody, how do you say that? We gained over 12,000 new followers, which helped increase giving.
Oh,
Oh my
wow.
gosh. Leslie, that's awesome. That's so
Mhm.
fantastic. I mean, viral videos are, I think, a little bit hard to predict. Um, and sometimes you don't get quite the right followers, but if it increased giving, that's fantastic. Wow, that's so
Mhm.
cool. Was there a, Leslie, I'm wondering if there was a strategy around that. Did you do something to intentionally try and make it go viral or to get SZA to repost or was that just happenstance? Got lucky. Love it. Well, that's fantastic. That's great
Yeah,
for you.
it is.
Amy says, I haven't found social media to be super effective for fundraising. I think it works best if you have board members, volunteer supporters who are willing to launch and promote peer-to-peer fundraisers on your behalf on social media. Yeah, social media is very tricky because in so many ways you are at the mercy of the algorithm and you can spend a lot of money on trying to beat the algorithm through ads and whatnot, and it's tricky. I've not found a lot. I'm trying to think of all of my clients. I haven't found a lot of organizations who have been super successful using social media. The organizations that I work with are really focused on grants from foundations right now. They have a loyal, a sort of loyal small individual donor base and are really focusing on foundations.
Someone wants to know what is SZA. I'll let one of the young folks explain who that is. It's a person.
Yes,
Anyone want our
or
rap
rap artists.
artist? There we go. Great.
I did have a quick question. So we have a very successful event that happens once a year. It's a lot of work. It's a Dancing with the Stars kind of thing. I'm relatively new in the position. It's been going on for this will be its 16th year. Um, One of the struggles I'm having is that because it is successful, it tends to be like the only time in the year that we get donations. People, I don't know if people just like save it up for like the February event, or if people just are under the impression because it gets a lot of coverage for being so successful, that like we don't need money the rest of the year. But I'm kind of struggling with like how to branch out in our fundraising when you already have a signature event that everyone kind of associates you with. And like, how can you sell yourself in different ways outside of that big event? Any suggestions?
Mm. That's a great question. I would love to hear from anybody else who wants to chime in if anybody else has any ideas. The one thing I will say, as everybody else is thinking about how they want to help you, Courtney, the one thing that I will say is like I'm all about transparency around your numbers, and so I don't know if you have any sort of newsletter or regular communication, like an email newsletter with your funders, with your community, but just sort of even sharing, like you don't have to share the details of every single number, but just sharing, maybe how your expenses are spread out through the year, but your fundraising really peaks, and it's really important that we have more consistency. Sharing that with your board, with your community in a way that is sort of meaningful to them. I'm all about transparency. I talk a lot about like using your numbers to tell a story. And so maybe there's a way that you can, that you can do that in a way that's compelling and meaningful, so that people realize like, yeah, we need money in the other 11 months of the year as well. Yeah, I don't know if anybody else wants to chime in or has any ideas for Courtney.
Well, that's my assignment then, to figure that one out.
There you go. There you go. Yes.
Looks like Leslie has a question directed to her from Nancy.
Oh yeah. Leslie, Nancy's asking you how to promote you.
It's funny.
Leslie says, regarding ROI, I just wanted to share the recent results from the new Giving USA report. Individuals, 66% of total contributions, bequests for individuals, 8%, foundations, 19% of total giving, corporations, 6%. Interesting. So this is, I'm assuming, nonprofits reporting where their money is coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that's interesting. So, if you were to use this data, maybe organizations that don't have a super strong, individual giving program, maybe that's something that you want to think about, because clearly those surveyed in this, in this report are showing that 66% of their contributions are coming from individuals. Interesting. Corporations give the least.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Leslie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we need our corporations to start stepping up to the plate here.
Step up.
That's
Yeah.
pretty disappointing for me personally to see that. Thanks for sharing, Leslie.
Any other questions for me or for your colleagues?
The big issue is
Yeah, Crystal says the big issue is companies not meeting us where we need them.
Mm-hmm. Great. I think we have about 7 minutes or less. Any other comments or questions? We can give you back 7 minutes of your day. I want to thank you so much, Stephanie. It's great information, very useful, timely, relevant, all of that. So thank you so much. Thank you, Leslie and Center team, for helping us with tech and monitoring. And again, for those of you who are interested in membership at the center, we'll have that information in the chat, as well as a survey. And please take a minute to fill that out for us. We'd appreciate it. And again, look out for the wraparound survey that'll come through the email. Great. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.